Thank you for tuning in today and welcome back to another episode of The Source. I'm your host, Zain Raza. Today I'll be talking to longtime peace activist Reiner Braun. From 2013 to 2019, he was one of the presidents of the International Peace Bureau. He's a regular speaker at peace demonstrations in Germany and is one of the founding members of the international peace network called No to War, No to NATO. Reiner Braun, welcome back.
Thank you for the invitation.
Let us begin this interview with the European election. Across the board, particularly in countries such as Germany and France, rightist parties made major gains in the European election. In Germany, the opposition conservative party Christian Democrats, CDU and CSU, came out as clear winners with 30%, and the rightist party Alternative for Deutschland, AfD, came with 15.9%. The ruling coalition suffered a major setback. The Greens finished with 11.9%, the Liberals FDP came in at 5.2%, and the Social Democrats SPD won just 13.9% of the vote, which according to the Deutsche Welle is the worst result for the SPD in a nationwide democratic election in more than 130 years. Notable gains were also made by Germany's new leftist party, the Sarah Wagenknecht Alliance BSW, which appeared for the first time on the political stage and won 6.2% of the vote in its first outing. In France, President Emmanuel Macron dissolved the parliament and called snap legislative elections after the preliminary results showed that Marine Le Pen's far-right National Rally is set to win about 32%, which would double Macron's centrist Renaissance that currently has 15.2%. Could you provide your assessment on these election results and what it means for the future of Europe?
The result of the election is one of the most worst cases you could get. The win of the right wing and the conservatives shows that neither peace nor social ecological transformation is on the agenda of the people. The people are deeply disappointed, above all in Germany, from the so-called from the government, and the alternative for them is to go to the right, not to the left. And you can see quite the same in France, even when it's quite optimistic to see the 30% in France were voting for the left parties, and that these left parties are united now in the election campaign. This is definitely a sign of hope. But for Germany, it shows that the people which are suffering under the social conditions have no hope, and this no hope and the resignation means that they are voting more or less to the right or are not going to the elections. Quite 50% are not voting. The minimum of hope at the elections is that with the Sarah Wagenknecht party, a party was elected which is very clear in an anti-war and peace position, which says we need negotiation and ceasefire for Ukraine and for other international conflicts. But what does this mean, 6%, when the others, the AfD, for example, got more than 50%? So what does this mean is that for the peace activists and all the critical voices in the country, we have more or less unite our voices and to enlarge our activities. And we have to speak a language that the people in the country understand, and that where the people can see a hope that changes are possible. This is a very difficult question when we are looking to the media and the propaganda of the media, which is supporting these two blocks, the governmental bloc and the conservative right-wing opposition bloc, with the same arguments. And I can see the big danger that we were calling in Germany Brandmauer, firewall, to the right wing, then not to accept them in the government, will be broken when we are looking to the elections in the East European state, which will happen in September. So it is a very difficult, very dangerous, and for us also a situation with a big, big challenge.
Mass immigration was one of the major driving topics. Don't you think there's an argument to be made that so many people that are entering our country uncontrollable, and there's so much burden on the social infrastructure, whether it's in social services, healthcare, everywhere you look, you don't get appointments, there's not enough doctors, etc., 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 that this is a legitimate concern that people wanted to voice. And secondly, we also saw with the ecological transformation that you talked about just right now, that it was faced with a lot of costs for farmers, with everyday people. It's not like people's lives are getting better with ecological transformation, and that the burden is more on middle class and lower middle class people than it is on the richest. So with that argument being made, don't you think the right is addressing all of these points? Even Sarah Wagenknecht has talked about, for example, how migration should be criticized constructively in a way that we should not let everybody in, and that we should take into concerns of the communal and local towns and their issues that they're facing. So what do you make of these arguments?
You know, the consequences of the migrations are brutal for many, many people. But the reasons why they are brutal are not the migrants or not the migration. The reason is the neoliberalistic politics in our country, which destroyed the social welfare state and which reduced the social activities of the state, which put more and more burdens on the shoulder of every of the German participants and people which are living in the country. So there is no relation in reality between the concerns about social development, bad social development, and the migration. And please, let us not call these mass migration. What we have in Germany, looking to other countries in the world, above all looking to countries in the global south, they have really mass migrations in their country, but not in Germany. It is very easy, under normal condition of a social politics, where the social question will be in the middle point of the activities of the government, to get welfare to these people, to help these people to get jobs, to integrate these people. But there is done nothing. So the people are suffering, the people are lying on the streets, and people see this and see their only social situation. And that is the reaction. And the right wing are misusing the situation which was developed by the neoliberalistic governments during the last 30 years. And what makes me really furious is that the main reason for migration are the wars. The wars mainly NATO is doing. And no one is speaking about the wars. When you reduce the wars, when we don't have so many wars in the world, from Sudan or over Congo, Libya, you can go through all the world, through the whole world. The number of migrations will be dramatically reduced. So let's speak about peace. Peace is the alternative also to solve the migration question. When we have migration, and when we have fair trade relations, that's the next point, with these countries, don't steal their resources and pay quite nothing for that, then we can really speak about migration. Migration problem can be solved. I absolutely agree, and I think everyone agrees that people love much more to live in their countries than to make these dangerous and cost-intensive way to Europe. But we have to be human to the people which are here, and we have to solve the background of the problem of migration. And one of the main backgrounds is in the war situation. That's the question to migration. And the second to transformation. I'm a big fan of a social ecological transformation. We need this. But I'm deeply against that the normal people are paying for the social ecological transformation and the rich get the profit, even when the rich are much more responsible for the problems, for the ecological problems we have. They are driving the big cars. They are flying every day, end and end. So we need a transformation, which first point is everyone should live better when we made the transformation. And we have to explain to the people why we make the transformation and have to develop the solutions for the transformation with them, not make law and say, please do and pay. That will not work. I know that many people hate now transformation, but we need this transformation when our planet and human beings will survive. So we need a social ecological transformation for the people and with the people, not against the people and not paying by the poor and by the normal people.
I would like to transition to the latest developments in connection with the war in Ukraine. The situation in Ukraine has escalated dramatically, especially since Russia launched an offensive in eastern Ukraine this summer and made considerable territorial gains. Despite billions invested in military aid, including high-tech weaponry, Russia has been able to make very much gains. The West, led by the US, also reversed its long-time policy of prohibiting Ukraine from using Western-made weapons to target military targets within Russia. Following this reversal, British broadcaster Sky News recently reported that a Ukrainian jet fired inside Russia for the first time since the war began. In addition, France has recently announced, despite facing disagreements with the US and Germany on this issue, that it will send French military trainers and specialists to support the Ukrainian military. Moscow responded to this development by stating that no military trainer supporting the Ukrainian military has immunity, regardless whether they're French or not. How do you view the West's response since Russia's successful summer offensive? Will it be enough to deter Russian aggression and reconquer all of the territory that Russia has taken so far?
The only possibility to solve the Ukrainian war is to come to negotiation and ceasefire, and to follow the suggestions which are developed now mainly by Brazil and China. I think the suggestion of Brazil and China to make a real international peace conference, which include all parts of the conflicts, is the right suggestion, and we should follow these suggestions. A peace conference like now in Switzerland, which has only one side, is a propaganda conference, and we can forget it. We need all parties, including Russia, at one table and then come to the two solutions. Maybe the solution will take time, like all the other negotiations. Look to the Vietnam negotiations. They were done about years, but they start. And we need now the start of these negotiations. And when we could get a ceasefire, this means we could have a frozen conflict, will save 100,000 of lives of young men on both sides, and will reduce the killing and will reduce the much bigger destroyment of Ukraine. The second point is the last development. Above all, the attacks of the early warning system of Russia is the preparation of the Third World War. Everyone knows, and in the strategy of the United States nuclear forces and in the strategy of the Russian nuclear weapon forces is mentioned, attacks to warning system means that we can answer with nuclear weapons. That is a dangerous situation. And we never had such a dangerous situation in Europe since the beginning of the 80s. And I think we have to do everything that these enlargement of the war will be stopped. And frankly speaking, this is the Vietnam syndrome. First, US were sending helpers to Vietnam. Then they were sending some officers. And then they were sending some troops. And then at the end, 500,000 and the dead people come home. And when you start sending troops, you will enlarge these sending troops. You will send more and more troops. And what is the consequences? The consequences is the war will be longer, the war will be stronger, more people will be killed. There is no solution on the military field. It is impossible to win this war against Russia. The only possibility is to come to negotiations and ceasefire. And if the front will be 20 kilometers to one side or the other side, this is not winning the war. And you can see Russia developed in a very short time a military industry, which is impressive in a very short time. And they can enlarge this. And they are able to have more troops, more weapons at their front line. And so this means it is the escalation becomes higher and higher, but the escalation is not the solution of the problem. So my only point is to say, stop it, come to the table, follow the suggestions of the global south, mainly from Brazil and China now, but also from the African Union, from many, many other countries, and come to a negotiation table and try to solve the problems, but first come to ceasefire, that the killing and the destroying of the country will be stopped.
The argument that is usually made is that the peace that you are, for example, advocating will be an unjust peace. It will be immoral, as in the negotiations, Russia has the upper hand now. It has made substantial territorial gains, and that it will demand a freezing of all of the territories that it controls, which, according to international law, is not belonging to Russia. So the peace that will be negotiated will be in Russia's favor, and therefore the West, led by Germany and the United States, is against an unjust peace and is advocating that we make sure that Russia is driven out. What do you make of this argument?
First of all, we don't know what will be the result of the negotiations. And before you start negotiations, you should be very careful to say the end of the negotiations. So let's see what every side is putting on the table. When we are coming back to the negotiations we had in March, April 22 between Ukraine and Russia, which leads to the Istanbul Agreement and to the discussion with the Israel Prime Minister at that time, Bennett, I think that was not an unjust peace. It was a peace. Russian troops are going home. We will have discussions and elections in the east part of Ukraine, and we will have Ukraine will coming back to a neutral country, which was for many, many years in their constitution, and which was also the background of the Budapest Agreement for 94 and many other things. So I can only say, let's see. And I'm very cautious to say what will be the result of the elections. The second point is we have to accept people's vote. And then let's have people's vote in the different part of Ukraine under the control of the United Nations and see what the people in the east of Ukraine and maybe in Crimea will decide what they want. And not to say that Russia is controlling these elections, we need neutral election observers. Maybe it is under the control of the United Nations or the OSCE. So let's discuss this with the people, because we have two elements. We have the sovereignty of Ukraine, but we have also the self-organizing interests of the people, the independence wish of the people. And between both, we need to balance. And the only possibility to balance this is to ask the people in these different regions for their opinion on what they want to have in the future. And definitely in the process of negotiations, Russian troops must be reduced. Russian troops must leave the country again. And then we have the biggest question of reparation. There we have to come also to an agreement. So it is not easy, these negotiations, but never negotiations are easy. And I can only count what the former German Prime Minister Helmut Schmidt was saying. I'm always, he was saying, in favor of hundreds of hours of negotiations. They are better than 1 hour of shooting. So let's go to this election way and then see how it will be developed. And let's go back and ask the people in the different parts, in the controversial parts of Ukraine, what are their wishes and how they want to live in the future.
I want to move towards a breaking development surrounding Israel and Gaza. On Monday, the United Nations Security Council endorsed a United States drafted ceasefire resolution to end Israel's military offensive in Gaza. This resolution comes after 8 months since Israel began its offensive in Gaza, which thus far has killed around 37,000 Palestinian civilians, as well as severely injured another 85,000. Before this development, the US vetoed any resolution at the UN Security Council calling for a ceasefire, stating that Israel has a right to defend itself. 14 of the 15 Security Council members voted for the US-backed resolution, while Russia abstained. This resolution divides the ceasefire into 3 phases. Phase 1 entails 6-week ceasefire, allowing humanitarian aid to enter, negotiations on the release of Israeli hostages, as well as Palestinian prisoners. Phase 2 outlines a permanent end to fighting, the release of any remaining captives, and a full withdrawal of Israeli forces from Gaza. Phase 3 is around the construction and development of Gaza, and that the people can return back again. Yesterday, the Israeli newspaper Haaretz reported that Hamas has accepted a UN Security Council resolution and is ready to negotiate over its details. The ball is now in Israel's court, and although the US has stated that Israel accepted this ceasefire, it is unclear how it will be compatible with Israel's goals that entails the complete elimination of Hamas, return of all hostages, and ensuring that Gaza never poses a threat to Israel ever again. How do you assess this development, and do you think this proposal can bring enduring peace to the Israel-Palestine conflict?
I'm not a religious man, but I'm praying that we will get ceasefire in the region and stop the brutal. It's difficult to explain the situation. It is so horrible that every picture you see makes it even more worse, and that words are not enough to explain what you see on the pictures. When you look to the women, to the children, how the people have to run from one part of the country to the other, and it is absolutely needed. And the most important thing is to come to ceasefire. So everything which is helpful to come to ceasefire, I'm deeply welcome. On the other side, I can say it is very easy. When the United States and Germany, which are giving 80% of the support to Israel and 90% of the military support for Israel, stop sending weapons and munitions, the war will end in latest 4 or 5 or 6 days, because the Israeli army get lack of their weapons. So when the Western countries means it seriously and want to stop it, they can. They have only to step to weaponize Israel. That is a very easy way. And they are not doing it. So it is always, like in many other conflicts, this double moral of the Western countries. On one side, speaking for peace, and on the other side, sending weapons and militarizing Israel. So that is the point that I'm saying our government, and above all the US government, is a part of the responsibility for the day-to-day killing which happened in Gaza. So, and that is my answer to the conflict. My second answer to the conflict is we need a solution which is more than a ceasefire, and which tried to solve a conflict which is now over 70 years old. And for me, again, this needs negotiations. And there is, since years, a suggestion for a peace and security conference in the Middle East. All parties of the Middle East, including the great powers, should sit together and develop a peace process. It's a little bit like in Europe in the 17th, which led to the conference in Helsinki in 75. We need the same. They have to sit together. They have to find solutions for reconstructions, for helping the people, for solving the problem of the Palestine people, for developing. And now it's a big question for 2 independent states, or the discussion if this is still serious when I'm looking to the settlers which are living in the Palestine area. This is very difficult, but you can only solve these problems when you are sitting together. That is the key point. And frankly speaking, Israel needs a new government. We need so quick as possible elections in Israel. I have not a big hope in the new government, but maybe it's a government without the fascists in the government. Their only aim of these fascists is to kill the Palestinians. Really, this is fascist behavior, to killing people because they hate these people. This is poor racist. And we have to kick them out so quick or the Israel people have to kick them out so quick as possible out of the government. So we also need elections in Israel. But the process starts in the beginning, and every step which helps to come to ceasefire and negotiations, I think is more than welcome and should be supported. And I say this as a German man, knowing the German history and the German responsibility for many, many developments in the regions. But we have a specific responsibility, but we have a peace responsibility. And we have not a responsibility to put more weapons and help to enlarge the killing. That is the responsibility we have from our history.
To my last question, and also what inspired us to do this interview was an email that you sent to me about the recent passing of Hans-Peter Dürr, a scientist and visionary and peace activist who recently passed at the age of 84. Can you talk about the life, history, and legacy of Hans-Peter Dürr and what we can learn from his work?
When I'm looking to the conflicts we have today, I many times remember Hans-Peter Dürr, what he would say. And I'm quite sure that he would be on our line and say, let's look for a peace solution and bring the people together. He was a scientist. He was very international. He was a big supporter of Albert Einstein. And he always was saying, science is international and science can bring people together. We are solving the problems internationally, so let's do the same on the political field. And that was one of his visions. And he was doing a lot to realize the visions. He was in strong relations to Gorbachev, and he helped him developing his peace and disarmament plan. He was coming up with the suggestion of a nuclear weapon-free world. It was going to him and say, let's come with the suggestions to a nuclear weapon-free world. So, and this is a man with the courage to do things in a time when it was not on the agenda. You know, the Max Planck Society is a very conservative society, and they were not so much in favor of what they called the Dürr foreign policy. They want to make their own foreign policy, but this was never a peace policy. But he was doing it. He was bringing different thinking people together for solving problems. He was a board member of Pugwash. Pugwash got the Nobel Peace Prize in 1995. And so he was also a little bit a Nobel Peace Laureate. And this was for common work for peace. And that was what he was doing his whole life. He was a brilliant scientist, but his engagement was for peace and disarmament.
Reiner Braun, longtime peace activist, thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you.
And thank you for tuning in today. If you're watching our videos regularly, please make sure to support our journalism the standing order via Patreon, Better Place, PayPal, or directly to our bank account. Even though our videos get watched thousands and even tens of thousands of times, and we have over 150 subscribers, only 530 people support us on a monthly basis with a standing order. We are an independent and non-profit journalistic organization that does not take any money from corporations, governments, and even does not allow advertisement, all with the goal of providing you with information that is independent, critical, which you just won't hear in the mainstream media. You will find the links to all the donation platforms in the description of this video. I thank you for tuning in and for your support. I'm your host, Zain Raza. See you next time.